Hello, everybody. Welcome to the very first episode of the Shenkman Friends podcast here at Shenkman and Company. I am your host, Phil Shenkman. Obviously, since I own Shenkman and Company, I'll be hosting this podcast. I am so excited that we are currently recording our very first episode of the Shenkman and Friends podcast. So let me just go through quickly what the Shenkman and Friends podcast is. The Shenkman and Friends podcast will be a podcast in a multimedia fashion where Philip and his friends will be talking about various topics pertaining to disability advocacy and that special education field. This will be done in a variety of different ways, which is why Shenkman and Friends is on YouTube, because of the fact that we are utilizing an out-of-the-box format. Because we decided, mainly myself, that it's important to fit the kind of vibe and mindset that I bring to all of my presentations and have that within this presentation podcast style format. So obviously we will have our traditional podcasts like this, and we will also have our non-traditional podcasts, which will just be in video formatting. I will go into more detail later on about why I decided to start this podcast, because I just felt it's extremely important to have a podcast where all voices can be heard, regardless of their abilities, political beliefs, all about that. Because it's important to me that we have to lift up every single story, every voice, because I'm a strong believer that even the voiceless deserve to have their voices heard and their story heard. Obviously, I will be telling my story throughout this podcast, but the main focus of this podcast is to lift other people's stories up. Because I've been lucky enough to be given a platform for the last 5 years to tell my story. And I think it's time for me to use my platform to help other people raise their own voices and tell their own stories. Because I'm a big believer that storytelling is something that is vital to the success of everything we do, and that storytelling can help propel everything we need to the forefront and make everything a lot better. Because without storytelling, nothing will be able to change. Because storytelling is the key to success, in my book. Because storytelling is a vital key that allows people to be successful and have people relate to you, especially in presenting in special education and advocacy. It's important to know how to tell a story, because that's just an important skill to have. I want to thank you so much for tuning in to our first episode of Shenkman and Friends podcast. This episode is titled The Pilot. So thank you so much for listening to the pilot episode of Shenkman and Friends podcast, and we will see you real soon. Thank you again.